So a huge decline in the number of banks available for small business owners to use for financing needs. And we want to make sure that that environment is still a stable force for them to bank, access financing, and get those credit needs met.
The Small Business Rundown is the official podcast of the National Federation of Independent Business, the member-driven voice of small business. NFIB and our members advocate to keep America's small businesses strong and independent in Washington, D.C., all 50 states, and the nation's courts.
Welcome to the Small Business Rundown, your place for information on independent businesses' victories and challenges in Washington, D.C. and state capitals. I'm Adam Temple, NFIB Senior Vice President of Advocacy. The NFIB Research Center recently released results from a survey asking small business owners about their banking activities and their experience in accessing credit. Joining me today to talk about the findings of the survey is the Executive Director of the NFIB Research Center, Holly Wade.
It's great to be back on the podcast.
Well, thanks for joining us. First, Holly, can you tell us about the main focus of the survey and why the Research Center dug into this topic?
Sure. So this is part two. The first part of our banking survey was a publication that we released back in April. And this was all as a result of the banking problems that we had with Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank in March. And we wanted to see what the impact was of these bank failures on the small business sector, if there was any impact. So we conducted a similar survey back in March, April, and there we found that the banking environment for small businesses in accessing credit was generally still intact. But 3 months after that, we wanted to revisit to see if things were similar or if the environment has shifted at all in the small business space. And so that's why we conducted this survey in particular.
Did it tell you anything about competition or what lack of competition can mean for small businesses in the banking sector?
Certainly. So we know that over the last, say, 40, 50 years, that bank consolidation has been fairly aggressive. Back in the 80s, there were roughly 14,000 independently owned banks. And now we're looking at an environment where there's roughly 4,000 independently owned banks. So a huge decline in the number of banks available for small business owners to use for financing needs. And we want to make sure that that environment is still a stable force for them to bank, access financing, and get those credit needs met. And so in this survey, we asked, what size bank that they were using for business purposes. And for most of our respondents, they're using small regional banks for business purposes. And then, there's a population using medium-sized banks and another population, about 17% using larger banks. And we wanted to also see, how the impact of bank location was for them, how often they visited those banks, because we know that it is an integral part of small business operations.
The survey found that increased financing was a top concern for small businesses, but what were some of the other concerns that the survey found?
Sure. So when asked about small business financing and getting their credit needs met, we asked a number of questions related to potential problems that they might have encountered in trying to access credit. And for most small business owners, I believe it was about 40% said that the rising costs, so interest rates going up, the rising cost of financing was a significant issue for them in accessing credit. That was the main problem for most small business owners when asked this question, for those who had received credit in the last 3 months. And then there were a number who said that, the amount of financing received was not up to what they were looking for, that they had some problems related to additional collateral requirements. But then also a few of them said that just the paperwork and the process by which to apply for financing was a significant issue for them. But for the majority of them, it is the increased costs of financing.
Right. And what are the main reasons small business owners are seeking financing in the first place?
So the main reason is just operational inventory and the cost of operating their business that they're looking for financing to keep that going and streamlining kind of cash flow issues that they might have. And then for a number of them, it's expanding their business. So purchasing new equipment or new buildings to expand out their business, which is, that's great for those businesses that find those opportunities for expansion. And then for others, it's replacing those capital expenditures that are broken down or that there's a new equipment that might be a better fit for their business. So a lot of reasons why they are looking for financing, but general operations and inventory is the main reason.
I see. And what has been their experience for those that are seeking financing? What's their experience in accessing that?
For the most part, they seem generally satisfied with the process and the amount of credit that they're looking to obtain from their bank. There's always issues, certainly, in the process that can be very frustrating for small business owners. But with the Fed increasing rates, the cost of financing is becoming more and more an issue, so that return on investment is becoming a more important consideration for businesses looking for financing to make sure that it makes sense for them to invest and then also be able to pay it back.
Shifting gears a little bit, how are small business owners generally feeling about the financial state of business and the economy overall?
So there was an interesting kind of three-part question that we asked in this survey. It didn't change much from the survey that we conducted 3 months ago. Mm-hmm. But in this survey, we asked, well, in both of the surveys, but in this one in particular, the results were that in evaluating their own business, most of them said that they're doing really well, excellent, good, okay. When asked about their local economy, there was a bit of deterioration for their local economy compared to their business in particular. So a fair amount were saying good, okay, as far as the economic conditions of their immediate area. However, when asked about the national economy, most small business owners view the national economy as poor. So not doing so well, more broadly speaking. This certainly could be the state of the labor market, inflation pressures that they're able to absorb, but looking more broadly at those headwinds are a bit more ominous on a national level. And then, we asked about whether they thought or when they thought the next recession might hit. And over half, or roughly half, said that they think that we're in a recession right now. So again, on that national level, small business owners don't find business conditions all that supportive. But thankfully, when asked about their specific business, they seem to be doing okay.
Interesting. So this is the second banking survey the Research Center's done this year. Were there any surprising results or big changes between the first one and this one that you saw?
Actually, we didn't see much change or shifts in survey respondents related to the banking survey, which was actually a good sign that there wasn't further deterioration, or there wasn't deterioration, generally speaking, in the banking sector. So small businesses are still able to access financing, albeit at a higher cost these days with the rising interest rates. But it doesn't seem that the banking crisis that we experienced earlier this year had any major impact in the small business economy, which was a good sign.
All right, Holly, before we wrap up, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that'd be worth including?
Well, for small businesses, looking at the general economic conditions that they're facing on a national level, they certainly see some challenges. But for their business in particular, they seem to be doing okay. Consumer spending is holding up, and that is a really good sign. And with rising interest rates, it's certainly a bit more expensive for them to access financing, but there isn't any additional deterioration in the banking system that we see in the small business sector. And that's certainly what we were hoping for in this survey.
Holly Wade with the NFIB Research Center, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Great to be back.
In today's show notes, we'll link to a page where listeners can learn more and participate in our latest surveys and calls to action. And now I want to thank you, the listeners, for joining us on today's Small Business Rundown. We'll be back every 2 weeks bringing you news and analysis from Washington, D.C. and state capitals so that you, whether you're a business owner or a supporter of one, can continue to blaze a trail.
The Small Business Rundown is brought to you by NFIB, the voice of small business. You can find us at nfib.com and on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn.